I find it fascinating that when I look at the back end of this podcast behind the scenes, of all the many thousands of people who listen to this show every single month, so few of them have actually hit that follow button, and even fewer have ever left us a rating or a review. If you enjoy the podcast and you get value out of it, then I would ask that you do us a solid and just take a small moment to hit that follow button. And if you want to go just one little step further, take a second to rate and review the show. It means nothing to you, but it means everything to me. And you just taking a small amount of your time to support the show is going to allow me to expand the reach of this podcast, bring it to more and more people, and continue to bring you more and more value every single week. So wherever you are right now, just take one moment, tap that follow button, and if you want to go just a little step further, leave us a rating and a review. Thank you so much for listening in and supporting the show. Thank you for being here today, and let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show podcast. Shane Kohler here. As always, pleasure to be on with you today. In today's episode, we're talking about how do I finally let go when a relationship is breaking me? And, I really want to have a heartfelt conversation about this because this is probably one of the most challenging things that we will ever go through in life. And you might find yourself in different places with this, right? Some of you may have recently gone through a separation. Maybe the other person chose to end it, or maybe you chose to end it, but you can't stop thinking about them. You can't stop thinking about the relationship. You're struggling to sever that energetic tie, right? Even though maybe that person isn't in your life anymore, they're still very much in your life in terms of your thoughts and feelings. And so much of your daily experience is dominated by your relationship with that person. And that's a situation I think we've probably all been in. And it's, again, one of the most challenging things we'll ever go through in life. Some of you may be in a situation where you are in a relationship with someone. Maybe you've been in a relationship for years, maybe decades, and you know that the relationship is hurtful to you. It could even be a narcissistic abuse situation or something to that effect. But you might be in a situation that is deeply hurtful, that is deeply harmful, and you can't bring yourself to let go. You can't bring yourself to end the connection and move on. And that's the situation that I think so many of us have found ourselves in at some time or another. And wherever you might find yourself in terms of this conversation, maybe it's not highly abusive, maybe it's not, anything crazy like that, but maybe it's just a relationship that feels like a dead end. Right? Maybe it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, and you're just kind of coasting along, but there's no real future in this. And maybe while it's comfortable, it's not deeply fulfilling, but day by day, as the relationship goes on, it's breaking you inside. It's like it's crushing your dreams, it's crushing your soul. Right? So, any of these could be a situation that someone might find themselves in. And as I said, I think all of us have probably been through these things at one time or another. And this is a deeply painful experience to be in, right? It's a deeply painful place to be where, it's like we can't imagine our life without the relationship, but we also can't imagine our life with it. And we feel just deeply stuck, deeply trapped, sometimes trapped within our own mind, sometimes trapped within an external dynamic. And So I just want to first acknowledge before we get too far into today's episode that uh, this is a very complex and difficult situation. And I just want to give you permission right now, whoever you are, wherever you're listening to this, give yourself some grace and understand that this is like maybe one of the most challenging life transitions you'll ever go through. This is something that is, touching on maybe deep stuff, deep patterns and beliefs and ways of approaching life and love that have been there maybe your entire life, maybe since you were very young. And so I just want to say that, like, release any shame or guilt or blame or judgment you have about not being able to leave or not being ready to leave or not being able to let go of this person, because this is a process, right? And we all have different processes, and some of us may be able to do it sooner. Some of us, it may take a little bit longer, but we all have our own process we go through. And especially some of these experiences are things I would say are like life defining, right? Where even if you've been in a relationship for a short amount of time or maybe even decades, but as you choose to sever a really strong emotional connection, that defines who you are as a human being in a lot of ways. It defines your identity in a lot of ways. And so separating from a relationship like this in so many ways can be life defining. And the person you are on the other side of this will not be the person that you are now. And sometimes that transition takes time and takes energy. So again, as we start today's episode, I just want to really give you permission to be where you are with it, and give yourself some love and some grace and some patience and some understanding as you figure out where you're going from here, as you figure out what this means, and as you figure out what to do about it. And in today's episode, what I really want to do is I want to give you some perspective, some insight on, maybe what's going on internally, because awareness is not enough, right? And that's maybe the first thing I want to say, is that awareness is not enough. And so you might know the relationship isn't good. You might know it has no future. You might know that you should move on and get over the person, but that's obviously not enough. If that was enough, you would have done it already, and not just taken the action that maybe you need to take, but also the emotional, like moved on emotionally, right? So knowing is not enough. Knowing is maybe a good start, but it's what we do with the knowing that really matters. And so I want to say that what I want to do in today's episode is give you some maybe perspective on the internal processes and things that are happening that might be keeping you stuck, or that you also just might need to work your way through as you get ready to leave. And then I also want to give you some specific guidance on like step-by-step process you can take to prepare yourself to leave and actually move out of the relationship. Or if you're already out of it, then how do you move on? How do you move forward? So it's going to be a powerful conversation today. And again, a very heartfelt one. And I just want to send you a lot of love and blessings wherever you are right now. If you're tuning into this, I assume that this must be relevant for you in some way. So I just want to give you a lot of love as you navigate this process for yourself. And, maybe I might be a little obvious in this first thing I want to address, but I just want to talk a little bit about the cost of staying. Right. And sometimes when we're stuck in it, we don't really think about what it's costing us to stay in it. And, there's of course, maybe the first thing I should say is that it's costing us the possibility to be in the kind of relationship that is really fulfilling. And so if you're in a relationship that you feel is breaking you right now, there's obviously a reason for that, right? If it's an abusive situation, if it's just a situation where it's unfulfilling, it's a dead end. If maybe you want higher levels of commitment and the person is not willing to offer you that, maybe it's a situationship where, you hope that you can get the commitment, but day after day, it's not coming, right? So there's I often think about it like the more quickly we can prepare ourselves to let go and move forward, the more time we have for the relationship that is really meant for us. And every day that we stay in a relationship that we know is not going anywhere, we are literally taking days and years out of the partnership and the dream that we can create and share with someone. And, it's always so much easier to really uh, focus on what's right in front of us, right? To focus on what's here and now, and a future possibility that we imagine isn't as real, isn't as tangible, at least in the way we experience it. But I want to say it actually is as real, right? That future relationship that you imagine is just as real as the one that's right in front of you. It's just not here and now. And the one right in front of you is here and now. But if you could think about it like this, that every day you stay in an unfulfilling dynamic, God forbid, an abusive situation, every day that you stay in a situation like this, you are literally taking days and years out of that dream partnership that you want to have. And that may not seem realistic, but it is true. It is true. And I think we all have a certain amount of like maybe riffraff we need to sort through, right? Like we all have a certain amount of like heartache we need to go through. We all have a certain amount of like pain and disappointment. And, we all have a certain amount of these things that we need to go through on our journey. But if you think about it like this, like let's say maybe there were 10 relationships that you would have in your life that were disappointing and fulfilling and would let you down and would break your heart. And, would maybe some of them might be abusive to some degree, or some of them might just be uncaring or not commitment ready, or whatever the narrative is. But let's say you had 10 relationships that you were going to be in before you finally meet your person, your life partner, the dream that you want to have. And maybe number 11 was going to be that person. Well, if each of those 10 relationships were 1 year long, then that's 10 years and you have the rest of your life with that person. But if each of those 10 relationships were 3 years long, now that's 30 years, right? If each of those 10 relationships were 10 years long, right? I mean, now you don't even make it to the person. So I know this might sound a little bleak, but I just really want to put this in a realistic perspective, that every day you stay in an unfulfilling situation, you are literally taking years out of the relationship that you're meant to be in. And if we spend too much time in those relationships, we don't make it, right? If 10 relationships, 10 years long, that's 100, that's your whole life. So if you spend too much time, you really don't even ever make it. And what I'm really getting at here is being able to recognize a relationship is not fulfilling, right? And this requires us being connected to our core needs, our vision for a relationship. It requires us being able to ask for what we want, have difficult conversations, and communicate effectively. And, it requires a lot of these like really skilled relationship abilities. But if we can meet someone and we can do everything we need to do in our relationship with that person to really clarify if this is the one or not. And when we realize it's not, we can learn to release and let go. That is maybe one of the most fundamental relationship skills that we'll ever have. It's maybe one of the most important things that we will ever master in terms of actually finding deep, committed, dedicated, conscious love in our lifetime. Because as I've said, it's like every day you stay in an unfulfilling situation, you are literally stealing time from the love of your life, from the partnership of your life. And so that's the first thing I want to say. And I also want to say, like, if maybe you have spent too much time in this relationship or in a past relationship, like, give yourself grace. And I said this earlier, but I just want to come back to it. This isn't about guilt or judgment about what you've done in your past. It's not about beating yourself up for past mistakes, but it's about really recognizing the urgency of clarifying where you are right now. And I think there's a lot of leniency. Like I know people who have met in their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, and had years of a wonderful relationship, 30 years, 20 years together. And that's a long time. And yeah, it's not 70 years, right? And so there is a real cost there. But wherever you are right now, like you still have so much available in your future. And so there's on some level got to be a willingness to prioritize your future above your past, without guilt, without shame, without judgment, without self-blame or self-criticism. And so that's the first thing I want to say. I just want to say that. Now, also I want to say that not only are you stealing time from the future partnership that you could have, but you're also, it's taking a serious toll on your self-worth. It's taking a serious toll on your vitality, on your energy, on your joy, right? Like a lot of us, because of maybe our attachment wounds, our attachment patterns, we have a way of like believing, and this is a misinformed belief. It's not true. But we have a way of believing that being with someone is better than not being with someone. Now, if you are to actually look at like scientific studies on this, right? People who are single and happy versus people who are in a relationship and unhappy, like the science would clearly show you that you can have much more joy, passion, vitality, energy, abundance, like all of the good stuff in your life as a single person than you can in the wrong relationship. So sometimes there's this misguided belief that even if it's not ideal, being with someone is better than being without someone. And I just want to say that's not true. That's an erroneous belief. There's no real data to back that. But there's plenty of data to show that you can be deeply happy, deeply fulfilled in your life as a single person. And do you maybe have moments of loneliness, right? Where you're in bed alone at night and you're saying like, oh, I wish someone was here with me. Of course, right? That's just human. That's just natural. So of course there are those moments. But if you think about it, when you're in an unfulfilling relationship, don't you also have moments of loneliness? Of course. We could say even in a fulfilling relationship, even with your ideal life partner, there might be moments of loneliness. And so loneliness is not something that a relationship really fixes. But I'll tell you what, being in an unfulfilling or even destructive relationship is much worse for your mental and emotional health and every area of your life than being single is. And so there's this very real cost in staying where I'm depriving myself of the future I could have. I'm depriving myself of my self-worth, my joy, my vitality, my energy, my passion, my abundance. Like I'm depriving myself of so much on a daily basis, keeping myself anchored to something that is really not adding to my life. It's only hurting. And so I want to start there, but I also want to come back to something I said earlier, that knowing is not enough, right? So this awareness that we're talking about, it's important to really acknowledge this and maybe even write it out. Like if you're in this situation right now, I would invite you to like get your journal out and write it out, right? Like seriously. That's going to be super, super helpful to just get it out of your head and onto paper. These are the reasons why I need to leave. This is what I could have. Even if I don't meet someone for a few years, even if I'm alone for a while, this is what my life could be like if I wasn't constantly mentally and emotionally weighed down with this relationship. And you think of the cost that like, even aside from just being in the relationship with the person, how much mental space does it take up where every day you're thinking like, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it? What can I say? How can I say it? How can I fix it? It's draining. And I also think that when we're willing to tolerate this, especially for years, something happens where we start to believe that we don't deserve better, right? Like we start to identify with the relationship. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to start with. But again, I want to come back to that. Knowing is not enough. Knowing is not enough. So what keeps us stuck? Because we can know this, but the awareness of it needs to be a foundation for something greater to happen. And so there are a few things I want to say that might keep us stuck, right? One might be the hope for change. And something I want to say for some of you who might be hoping for change, and maybe this is something you do with a coach or a therapist, but like you've got to ask yourself, is that hope valid? If you're in therapy right now and you're showing up to therapy together and you and your partner are both invested in the therapy and you're having the conversations you need to have and you're learning and you're growing together and you're trying new things and you see progress, well, then maybe hope is worth it. Or maybe you haven't even asked to go to therapy yet, right? So maybe you don't know how much hope there is because you haven't asked, like, honey, there's a real problem in our relationship. Can we go talk to someone and see if we can fix this? If you haven't even brought that up, then you don't really know what could happen if you did. So sometimes hope is valid. And I think I want to say this, like, for anyone who's struggling with hope for change, the first thing you need to do is honestly answer, is the hope valid or not? Have I done everything I can do? And I want to acknowledge that when you're in it, it might be really tough to identify that, right? Have I done everything I could do? Well, I don't really know. So this might be where, again, you need to talk to a coach, you need to talk to a therapist one-on-one, where you can discuss everything you've tried or not tried and get some expert guidance on if there really is hope or not. But if you're hoping for change, what you need to do is get clear on if your hope is valid or not. If your hope is valid, then take it to the point where it's no longer valid. If your hope is not valid, then accept that and start getting ready to move on. Now, so that's one thing that keeps us stuck, right? Is just hoping that it could change, hoping that it could be fixed. But while sometimes hope is valid, if there's not action towards that, right? Going to therapy is an example I used, having like deep conversations, addressing this, working on this together. These are all examples of it. But hoping for change while nothing is happening is unfounded hope. So I want to say that too. If nothing is changing, your hope is not founded. If nothing is happening, if there's no action happening, then your hope is unfounded. Now, I want to say this too, like sometimes we're addicted to the intensity of the situation. Sometimes there's an internal like relational blueprint or emotional blueprint, and we can become addicted to these emotions. The emotions of striving and trying and suffering and craving love. And like we can become addicted to all of this. Like there's actually a very real chemical response in our body. And sometimes it's characterized by highs and lows. And, they give us just enough hope to pull us back in right when we're pulling away. And then we get sucked back in and then they withdraw again. And there's this like push and pull and high and low. And all of this is creating a kind of chemical experience inside of our body. And we can get addicted to those chemicals very much the way we get addicted to drugs. And if you've been in if like that was the dynamic that you learned as a child, right? Maybe with your caregivers or even in your younger relationships where there was push, pull, high, low. A lot of times we can get addicted to that kind of constant chase and that constant pursuit. So that can keep us. It can literally be an addiction to our own emotional volatility. And then we create and attract and stay in external situations that allow us to continue creating that emotional experience. Now, again, if that's you, if you relate to that, if that resonates, I would say like, this is something you want to get some coaching on, right? This is something you want to work with someone around to really get to the bottom of this, because that's, you might get to a point where you leave the relationship, but if you're addicted to that, then you're going to continue pursuing it and you're going to likely recreate it. I talked about this, but I'll just say it one more time. The fear that I can't be better on my own, or that there's nothing else out there for me, that I can't find a better relationship, that I can't be happy without this person. Even the fear of just the feeling of loss, right? It's better to stay in limbo than really embrace and feel the completeness of the loss. So all of these are like part of the reasons we stay stuck. And, just to reiterate, we've got to clarify, is the relationship really hopeless or is there real valid hope? That's one thing. Two, we've got to be willing to embrace the feelings, right? Sometimes staying in the relationship is just a way of protecting ourselves from something we don't want to feel. If there's a certain blueprint of love or an addiction to kind of a chaotic cycle within us, we've got to acknowledge that addiction. We've got to, really seek help for that. The same way, I'd say the same way like a drug addict or an alcoholic would seek help for an addiction. Right? Like addictions can heal. They often do. I mean, I'm living proof of that. But we've got to seek the help we need. So these are a few of the things I just want to touch on in terms of what it is that keeps us stuck. Like when we're aware that we should leave, but we still don't do it. These are the reasons why. And so for whoever's going through this right now, I would ask you to identify for yourself. Again, maybe write it out in your journal. What's your reason? Are you hanging on to invalid hope? Are you afraid of what it's going to feel like to leave? Are you afraid of the feeling of loss, the feeling of letting go? Are you addicted to the intensity, the push-pull, the high-lows? Is it maybe a mix of all three or two out of the three? Right? But again, awareness isn't enough, but awareness is power, because when I have awareness, I can start to consciously focus on what needs to happen next. And so identify what's keeping you stuck in the relationship. And one other thing I want to say here is sometimes what's keeping us stuck is the idea that we have of the person or the idea we have of the relationship that is not the relationship itself. Sometimes this can be the most seductive part of it. Right? So if you're in a relationship where you're, again, going back to the topic for today, it's destroying you, it's breaking you. And you know that the relationship is breaking you. Now, just logically speaking, there's no rational reason why someone would stay in a relationship that is hurting me, that is unfulfilling, that is breaking my heart. And so on some level, I must be in a different relationship. Now, stay with me. I know that might be confusing, but I'm going to clarify it. On some level, I must be in a different relationship than the one I'm actually in. And so here's the reality of the relationship. The person is maybe leading me on and not giving me commitment. Maybe they're abusive. Maybe they're manipulative. Maybe they're dishonest. Maybe they've cheated on me. Maybe like all these reasons, right? Maybe they're just insensitive, or they don't have the relational skills, or they can't receive feedback, or they can't have deep conversations, or they can't hold space for my emotions, or whatever, right? Like all these different reasons. But there's the reality of the relationship. And then there's the relationship I'm in my mind. And those are often two different things. You see, I might have an image of who this person is and an image of what the relationship is that is not actually what it is. If anybody relates to that, tap that heart a few times. Curious to see who relates to that. Because I might be filtering that experience in the relationship through my hopes, through my fantasies, through my ideals, but not actually being present to here's what I think the relationship is and here's what it really is. And a lot of times the process of letting go can be as simple as recognizing that the relationship I'm in is not the relationship I think I'm in, or the relationship I hope I'm in. You know, a lot of times what will happen in a situation like this is we meet someone and there's that electricity when we meet. And people always put their best foot forward in the beginning, right? So, we're experiencing the best of this person and they're experiencing the best of us. And this is all motivated by this incredible chemical cocktail that's billions of years old, right? I mean, you think about if mating and sex wasn't so good, nobody would do it. So like in order for our race to perpetuate itself and stay alive on this planet, right, there needs to be like the strongest forces of nature within us driving us together. Otherwise, we just wouldn't do it and the species would die out. So like when you meet someone, there's a chemical cocktail of hormones that is billions of years old. It's literally probably the most powerful thing in nature, driving us together. Plus, people are putting their best foot forward. And so a lot of times we'll meet someone and there will be this period of 3 months or 6 months or even a year where things are just absolute bliss. But then little by little, that bliss starts to die out. And what starts to come through is the true character of the individuals and the character of the relationship, who they are together. And a lot of times we'll be 4, 5, 6 years into a relationship or more, in a completely different relationship with a completely different person, but still filtering it through what that first year was like, or what that first 6 months was like. And believing that somehow we can get back to that without recognizing that that's not who that person was. That's not what the relationship was. The relationship was never that. There were certain drives and emotions and chemicals that made it seem like that. But that first 6 months or that first year is not what the relationship is. Everything that has happened since is what the relationship is. And so sometimes we're trying to get back to something that was never really real to begin with. And sometimes just really recognizing that and letting that sink in can be the motivation we need to leave. When we really recognize that, as much as I thought this was my dream partner, when I take a step back and look at them and I look at our relationship, I see clearly that it's not the dream. I was just projecting a fantasy onto it. I was projecting a past experience onto it. And I think this is really, in so many ways, the essence of letting go. Right? It's releasing the fantasy, releasing the idea of love. And the courage to actually leave, the courage to step away, and even the courage to let go. So some of you may already be in a separation and you're just struggling to let go of the person. The courage to do that comes from a deep devotion to ourselves. And this is the crux and the essence of everything that we're talking about today, right? So I said awareness is not enough, right? Knowing, oh, it's bad, it's not working, we're fighting a lot, I'm not getting what I want. It's like knowing that is not enough. We'll stay through all of that. But a deep devotion to myself is what really changes the playing field. A deep devotion to myself is what truly allows me to let go and release this relationship and move into my future, whatever that may hold. And so, what does a deep devotion to yourself look like? And I just want to talk about that for a moment because, like, so many of us have given up our devotion to ourselves in exchange for a devotion to the relationship. So many of us have been living in a pattern where, and maybe we've been doing it for many years, where I give and give and give and give and give to this person, hoping that someday in the future I'll get everything I've been giving in return. And I want you to just think about the energetic or vibrational quality of that for a moment. Right. So, and I'll just do a quick aside here. We live in a vibrational universe. We live in a reflective universe. And so the energy that I embody, the vibration that I embody, becomes the origin point for everything else I experience in my life. So my relationships, however they are, whatever way they are responding to the origin point of the energy and the frequency that I embody. This may sound mystical. It's not really mystical. It's just reality. And so there's a certain energetic quality, a certain vibration that me giving, and hoping that if I give enough, I'm going to get back what I've been giving at some point in the future. That's a certain frequency. It's a certain energetic vibrational frequency. And embodying that frequency is going to attract and create relationships that are reflective of that frequency. And so if I show up in relationship that way, and I'm willing to give and give and give and give, I'm going to attract people who are willing to take and take and take and take. And again, this may be something you took on as a child. Maybe this is what you had to do in your childhood home. And so you learned to do it then. You learned when I was very young, this is how I get love. And you embodied that, and you've been embodying it ever since. But now your whole life is filled with takers. There's also a frequency of being devoted to myself. If a relationship drains me, if it hurts me, if it's unfulfilling for me, I'm going to release that. I'm going to let it go. Doesn't even mean I hate the person. Doesn't mean I judge the person. Actually, forgiveness is also part of devotion to myself. Right? I forgive the person because I don't want my anger or resentment towards them to weigh me down. So I release them. I let them go. I forgive them. But my devotion is ultimately to myself. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not generous, doesn't mean I'm not kind. It doesn't mean that when a relationship really shows up for me that I won't reciprocate that. But I'm devoted to my own wholeness. I'm devoted to honoring myself first. And so this is where when we start to step into this, it's a conversation of unworthiness. I give myself away and just hope that it'll be enough to be loved. Versus worthiness. I honor myself. I respect myself. I love myself. I treat myself well. One of the ways I treat myself well is to not allow my life to be consumed by something that is hurtful or harmful to me. Because I treat myself well, because I embody this worthiness, because I experience my wholeness within myself, I will, as a frequency, create an external world that reflects that. So there's a shift, and sometimes this is what is really required to leave. Is shifting from being committed to someone else or something else to being committed to myself. Shifting from trying to hang on to a relationship to give my life meaning and identity and worthiness and value, right? If I can keep this person, if I can get their love, if I can be valued and appreciated and cherished by them, then I'll be enough. And so I'm giving myself over to them, hoping to find my value and my worthiness in that relationship. rather than pulling all that energy back into myself and saying, I'm going to choose to be enough. I'm going to choose to love myself the way I wish that person would love me. I'm going to choose to be devoted to myself the way I wish that person would be devoted to me. I'm going to choose to take care of myself the way I wish that person would choose to take care of me. And the first way I'm going to do that is by ending this connection with this person. This is maybe the most fundamental shift that's needed. So as you really step into and embody that devotion to yourself, and maybe part of this is recognizing that, like I might be a little lonely for a while. There's definitely going to be a process of grief, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment in terms of the practical steps of moving forward and the processing we go through. But while I might be a little lonely for a while I might go through a process of grief, while I might struggle a little bit, you know what? I'm going to be able to get up every morning and I'm going to be able to take care of myself. And I'm going to be able to love myself, and I'm not going to have my life occupied with this person and this relationship that is draining me. And maybe that, just the vision of having peace, even if it's not a wild, crazy, exciting ride, but just getting up in the morning, being able to have peace. And even if it's not immediate peace, but being able to cultivate peace. Having a vision of yourself where you can get up and drink your morning coffee and just sit there and just feel at ease within yourself without having this person in your life and these constant thoughts in your mind about trying to figure out this relationship and these constant emotions of longing and unfulfillment and being heartbroken and being disappointed and being let down, right? Just freedom from the cycle and being able to cultivate some peace. Maybe that can be the vision of self-love that motivates change. So as we shift from a devotion to others, a devotion to finding my worth and my self-love externally, to a devotion to really loving and caring for myself, to a devotion to being for myself the thing that I wish others would be for me. Doing for myself the things that I wished a relationship would do for me. And as I really recognize and affirm that I have the ability to do that, and I can at least see a glimpse of a vision of what that might look like that's just a little bit more compelling than where I currently am, that can motivate the action that's needed. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about some strategy. I'll call it strategy, right? And when I say strategy, I mean like practical steps. So, okay, I've acknowledged that I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. I know it's hurting me. I know it's time to leave. I know it's time to let go. What do I do? How do I get myself from where I am right now to the point where I'm actually out and free? And so first thing I want to say on that note is focus on building your circle of support. Maybe make a list. Who can I rely on in this transition? It doesn't need to be a lot of people, but maybe a few close friends, family members, maybe your mother or your father or brother or sister, or just close friends or people you know, maybe a therapist, maybe a coach, maybe there's a community that you're part of. Even if you just had like one or two or three people, and you could even reach out to them in advance and tell them what's going on and say, I'm going to leave. I'm going to end this relationship. And I just wanted to let you know that like, I'm going to be going through a hard time and ask you to be there for me. Right? So you reach out to these 2 or 3 or 4 friends or family members or people in your community, or, maybe one of them is a therapist or a coach or something like that. And you share with them what's about to happen in your life. And you say like, listen, can you just text me every morning and check in with me? Can you just, be there for me as I go through this? It doesn't have to be a lot, but knowing that you have someone outside of this relationship that you can lean on and that you can rely on can create some emotional safety so that you're not alone in going through this. So that's the first thing. And I don't want to underestimate how important that is. Maybe of all the steps, maybe that's the most important. You're not going through this alone. You have that emotional support lifting you up and building you up as you go through this. Second thing I want to say is prepare for emotional withdrawal and expect the triggers. Right? So when I think about breakups I've been through, it's like everything reminds me of that person. Everywhere we go, I remember the time we went there together. Everything in my house, I remember them sitting on that chair. I remember them cooking in the kitchen. Everything is a memory. It's like constant, it's persistent. There's obviously a period of grief, and it obviously depends on the depth of the relationship and the unique dynamics in each situation. But I don't think the grief of ending a strong romantic connection is any less than the grief of somebody dying. Again, depending on the specific nuances of the situation, it could be more. Right? So prepare for the emotional withdrawal. Understand that I'm going to go through a season of grief. And if you're familiar with like the stages of grief, there's denial, there's bargaining, there's anger, there's depression, and there's acceptance, right? And it's not necessarily linear, right? You might be in denial and go to anger and back to denial, and then you start bargaining, and then you're depressed, and then you're angry, and then like you kind of bounce around through all these stages. And sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years. Again, it's got a lot to do with the individual. It's got a lot to do with the specific process that they're moving through, where they are in their journey of awakening. It's got a lot to do with the nature of the relationship they're leaving and what that relationship really meant to them and the place that had in their life, right? So every situation is unique. But understand that you're going to go through this journey of grief. Maybe it's for months, maybe it's for years. Something I want to say about grief is knowing how to go through it helps a lot. Right? So I remember like my first real experience of like relational grief. Well, there were two, but one was when my grandma died when I was 11, and I didn't really have any help with that. It was just like, this is life. But for me, it was like an existential crisis because my grandma was like my rock. And then I was 11 years old and she had always been there, and then she wasn't there. And I didn't have a therapist or, anybody to help me understand what was happening for me. Like I knew intellectually that death is a part of life, but emotionally I was going through like a literal existential crisis. How could my grandma not be here? Right. And it was just like, it psychologically broke me to some degree. And I didn't have any help with that. I didn't know how to handle that. Another experience that I think is really potent, hurt just as much as my grandma, if not more, was when my first high school love broke up with me. And, I think this was maybe even harder than my grandma because I don't know if it was Robin Williams. There's this quote, it might've been Robin Williams, but somebody said this. They said that of all the ways to lose someone, death is the kindest. And I think that like my grandma leaving, while it was hurt and it fucked me up to some degree, like there was nothing but love there my whole life. She was consistent. She was stable. She loved me. She was there for me. So even though I lost her, I lost that relationship. It was different than when my first love in high school broke up with me and then cheated on me and then mocked me. And, because it was like, she was still there and she was choosing not to love me. And not only was she choosing not to love me, she was choosing to hurt me. And so there were like all these complex layers to it. And the reason I'm sharing all of this is because like with both of these experiences, which first one happened at 11, second one happened at 16, with both of these experiences, I didn't know how to grieve, right? I didn't know about the stages of grief. I didn't know about what to do. I didn't have any tools. And so, like, I would say both of these experiences fucked me up more than they needed to because I didn't know what to do with them. And so, what do we do with grief? Well, I think maybe the most important thing to do with grief is to allow yourself to experience it. That sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's not easy, right? And so, know that, like, when I talk about going through these stages, denial and bargaining and anger and all of this, like, it's your ego that's going through these stages. It's the insecure, fearful, survival based part of yourself that attaches to things for security and then tries to hold on to these things so that it feels safe. And so what's actually happening is, like, if your ego has grasped onto something and you're holding on to this thing, we just call it a relationship for security, and then that relationship is taken away, now you feel deeply unsafe. But the part of you that feels deeply unsafe it's the ego, it's the survival structure, it's a surface part of yourself. Deeper within yourself, there's an impenetrable safety that no matter what happens, you can always find the safe place inside of yourself. We could call it like the spiritual essence of who you are. But that always feels safe, no matter what you've been through, no matter how you've been hurt, no matter what's been done to you. That part has never changed. But the ego structure, the social identity, that changes, and it changes a lot, and it's very afraid, and it tries to create security in all these kinds of external ways. And so what grief really is, if we break it down to what is happening when we're grieving something is being taken out of our life, a relationship, something we relied on for security is being taken out of our life. And because this thing is being taken out of our life, we feel this obvious loss or emptiness. And what's happening is we are learning to access a deeper place in ourselves that doesn't need to cling to that thing for security. And that's a painful process. And again, when my grandma died, when my high school girlfriend broke up with me, I didn't know that this was even a possibility. I didn't know that this was available. I was attached to these relationships and I clung to them, and the loss of them was deeply devastating. And I didn't know that I could access something deeper within myself that was still okay. And so what happened as a result of these experiences was my ego became stronger, right? So my guard, my defenses, my protective mechanisms, my manipulations, like, it became stronger. It became overdeveloped as a trauma response. I had worse relationships as a result. I became like more cynical, more pessimistic, more guarded, right? So when we don't grieve in a healthy way, we go the other direction, and our protections become overdeveloped. So allowing yourself to feel the grief. When you get triggered, right? Everything reminds you of them. You stop, you take a deep breath, you feel it. And as you really feel it without trying to protect yourself from the feelings, you start to connect with the part of yourself that can feel safe even in these feelings. You start to connect with the part of yourself that is always safe, even though you lost the person, even though you were hurt, whatever it was, there's a part of you that's still safe. And as you're willing to embrace the feelings rather than trying to protect yourself from the feelings, you connect with that part of yourself. You start to recognize that you have this part in you. And so grief, while it can be the reason you shut down more than ever before, it can also be the reason that you open up more than ever before. Sometimes when I talk about this, I call this allowing your heart to break open. Right? Your heart breaks, but does your heart break closed or does it break open? And if you can recognize that underneath the pain and the nonstop rumination and the narratives in my mind and the need to grasp out and control. And underneath all of that, there's a part of me that is calm and still, and it feels safe, and it is able to move through this experience with grace. And you can think about it like a larger part of yourself holding the smaller part of yourself. And the smaller part of yourself is freaking out and throwing a tantrum, and it's angry and it's hurt and it's wounded and it thinks it's so unfair and it's sad and all of this. But underneath that, there's a graceful, consistent presence inside of you that is just holding this wounded part of you. And you're moving through it. So you're in denial, but underneath the denial, there's surrender. You're bargaining, but underneath the bargaining, there's surrender. You're angry, but underneath the anger, there's surrender. You're depressed, but underneath the depression, there's surrender. And as you continue moving deeper and deeper through every stage into this surrender, eventually what starts to emerge is acceptance, which is the final stage of grief. And acceptance is where we've resolved it. But if we don't grieve in a healthy way, we never really move into acceptance. We just remain in cycles of denial and bargaining and anger and depression. And we just repeat those in different ways, right? Acceptance is when we actually resolve the grief. So, there's a lot to be said about this, and I don't have time to go into all of it today, but, having some practices like journaling, like meditation, like breath work, working with a coach, working with therapists, being in a community, leaning on friends for support, right? Like all of this allows you to really feel the experience fully. And so I'd say this would be a time to develop some practices and work with them and allow yourself to continue to more and more deeply feel what you're feeling, allow it to be there, and experience an acceptance of it. Now, just a couple things I want to say. Having clear boundaries, right? And if you're going through a separation, like no contact is the rule. A lot of people want to say, well, maybe we could still be friends. Maybe we can help each other through this. Like, it's a nice idea, but in practical terms, it never works. That is always some attempt for our ego to continue to maintain the attachment. Few years goes by, you're both in different relationships. If you actually have the potential for a good friendship, maybe you can be friends. That's fine, but it doesn't need to happen right now. Because when you try to maintain that relationship in some way, a friendship or something else, friends with benefits is even worse. When you try to maintain that relationship, your ego is going to continue seeking for that person to be what they've always been to you. You're not learning who you are without the person. You're not really accessing those deeper parts of yourself that I've been talking about. You're just putting a Band-Aid on the pain by keeping that attachment alive in some way. So you've got to go no contact. For some of you, the separation might include co-parenting things, right? Or financial things. So like having a plan. And again, this might be even, some of you may need to talk to an attorney about this. But having a plan, having clear boundaries, knowing that when I do this, this is how I'm going to do it. That's very important. Having rituals, right? Like daily self-care practices. Again, I mentioned like journaling and breath work and meditation, therapy, coaching, right? Like having rituals and practices, daily acts of devotion to yourself. And in the beginning, it might just be about really being with the pain that you're feeling, right? In the beginning, a lot of it's what it is just processing the grief, going through those stages of grief. But as you get through it, what starts to happen is more and more, it starts to be less about dealing with the past and more about dealing with the future, right? So in your journal, you start to write about how life can be, what inspires you, what you're excited about, what the future might hold, how you can spend your time in a fulfilling way, the kind of relationship that you dream you would like to be in. So having these practices that you're doing on a regular basis allows you to process the emotion that you need to process and also create a compelling vision for what's on the other side of this. And you need to do both. Right? If you're moving out of something, you need to be moving towards something else. There needs to be a compelling vision for why you're leaving this behind. So have practices. Again, one of those practices could be you ask a friend, can you text me every morning? Or can we have a phone call every morning or every night or whenever it works with the schedules? Right? But look, can we just, for the next couple months while I go through this, would you be willing to just get on the phone with me for 15 minutes every day and just listen? That might be a vulnerable thing to ask, but if someone cares about you, they'll absolutely do it. There's not a friend in my life that I wouldn't make that time for if they really needed it. And I have friends who would do the same for me. So the practices that are an extension of that devotion you have to yourself, your commitment to going through this process in the healthiest possible way. And something I would say also, in addition to this, is like commit to some kind of healing environment. So like, for example, we have like My Inspired Love community. A lot of people who are going through a breakup like this might join My Inspired Love community. And we meet once a week. It's an ongoing coaching circle where we sit and we talk about these things. And having a community of people who can really be with you where you're going. Like a lot of our friends, they might have the best intentions, but they're not really able to hold space for us. Maybe they don't have the emotional intelligence to do so. Maybe it makes them uncomfortable. Maybe the best they can offer is screw them. They're an asshole, whatever. Right. Like, and maybe sometimes it helps to hear that, but that's not really healing. And so sometimes our friends, while they might love us and they might be there for us, they're not really the environment that's going to facilitate our healing. And so that might be where having a community like My Inspired Love community would be a great thing. And there are lots of communities like that. I'm not saying you have to join mine. But if you're listening to this, maybe you'd want to. But having a community of people that are on the journey with us, that understand what we're going through, that are there to offer us support and understanding and empathy, that can offer a healthy perspective, right? Like that's super, super important. The support like that often is what equates to the long-term transformation. It's what allows us to move through in the healthiest possible way where, our friends saying, oh, they're just an asshole, get over them. Like that tends to build our defenses. It tends to break our heart closed rather than breaking our heart open. So I want to end with that. And I just want to say that, if you're going through this right now, I said this in the beginning, but I just want to come back to it. Like if you're going through this right now, I want you to give yourself a lot of grace and compassion and understanding, knowing that you're going through one of the greatest life challenges you will probably ever go through. And if it takes time, it's okay. Like I would rather have you grieve for a year and really go through every stage of that and really experience all of it and really let your heart break open than to grieve for a month and stuff it all down and force your way through it and have all your defenses and all your relational stuff be more active than ever. Like, I mean, look at a lot of people. This is how they are, right? I mean, go read some of the comments on my Instagram posts. It's like just people projecting their pain, because they've been hurt, as we all have. There's not a person on this planet who hasn't been hurt, but they've been hurt. And rather than really allowing themselves to deeply integrate that pain and heal through it, they become more guarded, more defensive, more protective. And then we wonder why we can't have a healthy relationship, because you're bringing all that to every relationship. Like a lot of us don't want to take the time to grieve. We want to be like, we should be over it already. Screw them. They're an asshole. Why am I wasting my time on them? I should be over it already. And so we force ourselves to get through it, and all of our defenses get stronger. And then we go back out dating, but we're dating with all this baggage and all this wounding, and we're projecting all of it. And like, this just compounds. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And we end up sabotaging things that could go well. We end up becoming deeply attached to things that are destructive. Like, all it does is everything that got us into that situation in the first place just compounds and gets worse. This is why taking time to really focus on your healing is so essential. And in the Inspired Love program, I offer a very clear path to healing. Plus, I offer a community that can support you, and guidance and coaching that can support you as you go on that path. And a lot of times we need that kind of structure. So I just want to say in closing today that, again, give yourself grace, give yourself patience, take the time that's needed. Understand that this is not just like, screw them, I'm over it, I want to move on. But this is like, it's like a transformation of your soul. And if you can dedicate the time that's needed to really experience that transformation in its completeness, on the other side of it, like, it'll pay off exponentially. Like, that year that you spend really grieving consciously will give you 10 years back on your life. But if you cut it short and just try to get through it in a month, it's going to cost you 10 years in your life. And a lot of times we don't want to take the time. We just want to feel better. We just want to get it over with. We just want to find someone else and be happy. But, like, I'll get a little spiritual here for a moment. Like, I don't believe life is here to make us happy. I believe we can experience incredible joy, incredible happiness in life. That's a part of it. But the other side of that is also the pain that we go through. And it's not about trying to get all the pleasure and none of the pain. It's about really allowing ourselves to be present in every season, whatever that season is bringing. And if you're in a season of grieving, or you're getting ready to go into a season of grieving, what I want to say is embrace that. Get the support you need to move through it powerfully and with grace. Love yourself enough to do the important work there. Aside from that, everybody, I just want to say thank you so much for being with me in today's conversation. If this is for you, if you're going through this right now, I just want to say my heart goes out to you. I know what this feels like. I know how challenging it is to go through an experience like this. And the promise I want to make to you is that while it's challenging and while you're going to go through some dark times, if you really allow yourself to be present to the fullness of what you're going through, on the other side, it's going to lead you to something brighter than you've ever known. And I can make that promise because that's how life works. And I just want to invite you to embrace that and go through that. And if you need some support with this, you can email me, shane@thelivingrelationship.com. You can send me a message on Instagram, DM me, and we can talk about and see how we can support you as you go through this. So lots of love, lots of blessings, everybody. Thank you for being with me today. I'll be back here next week. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.